My name is Clara, and I'll never forget that night. The restaurant glowed with chandeliers, laughter bouncing off marble walls. Waiters circled with champagne flutes, while cameras flashed on my sister. Kate was radiant, of course, draped in silk, dripping with praise. Then Mom rose, glass in hand, eyes sparkling with pride. "To Kate," she declared, "the daughter I'm truly proud of." Applause erupted, forks clinking, relatives beaming at the golden child. I sat frozen, my smile carved thin, hands trembling under the table. When dessert arrived, a waiter slid a leather folder toward me. The bill, nearly $2,000, stared back like a slap. Mom leaned closer, her voice a dagger. "Go on, Clara, pay it." And in that moment, humiliation burned hotter than the candle flames. That bill wasn't about money. It was about my place in this family. Growing up, I learned early that my place in the family was secondary. Kate was always the star. The blonde curls, the easy smile, the girl who got applause just by walking into a room. Relatives would pinch her cheeks and gush, "She's going to be a heartbreaker someday." And then they'd glance at me, awkwardly adding, "Clara's the smart one." It sounded like a compliment, but it was really a consolation prize. When Kate wanted ballet lessons at 6, my parents signed her up for the most expensive studio in town without hesitation. When I begged for a science camp that same summer, Mom sighed. "Too costly. You can go to the free program at the library." Her first recital dress cost more than my entire back-to-school wardrobe. Meanwhile, I wore hand-me-downs, my hems crooked from learning to sew them myself. The pattern never changed. When Kate needed a new dress for every school dance, she got it. When I needed textbooks for advanced math classes, I was told to borrow or buy used. She spent her afternoons rehearsing. I spent mine bagging groceries to pay for a graphing calculator. She was praised for being busy with activities. I was told to be responsible and pick up shifts. College only deepened the divide. Kate's tuition was fully covered, her apartment paid, and a monthly allowance wired like clockwork. I lived in a cramped apartment with 3 roommates, working nights in a care facility to afford ramen dinners. She majored in communications, floating from party to party, posting photos in designer clothes. I studied nursing, pulling 80-hour weeks, yet my achievements barely drew a nod. Whenever I questioned the imbalance, my parents shut me down. Dad would mutter, "Different kids, different needs." Mom would say with that cutting sigh, "Clara, don't be jealous. It's not attractive." But it wasn't jealousy. It was exhaustion. The exhaustion of being invisible while giving everything. Of watching one sister celebrated for simply existing, while I had to fight for scraps of acknowledgement. That night at the restaurant, when Mom raised her glass, all that quiet unfairness boiled over into humiliation I could no longer swallow. Adulthood was supposed to free me from the shadow. I thought moving out, paying my own bills, building my own life would balance the scales. But favoritism has a long reach. When I graduated nursing school, I sent photos of me in my cap and gown. My parents didn't come. They were busy driving Kate to Los Angeles for a brand collaboration shoot. Dad texted a flat congrats. Meanwhile, Mom posted on Facebook, "So proud of Kate chasing her dreams." The message was clear. My steady path was invisible. Her glittery chaos was worthy of applause. I rented a small 1-bedroom in Chicago, furnished with secondhand finds and the plants I tended on my balcony. Every item in that apartment was mine, bought with paychecks from 12-hour shifts. I built a quiet pride from survival. My scrubs, my patient thank yous, my financial independence, those were my trophies. Kate, meanwhile, floated from one crisis to another. When her rent was due, my parents wired money. When her car broke down, Dad co-signed a loan. When a brand deal fell through, Mom called me, voice honeyed. "Clara, can't you help your sister this once?" This once had become dozens of times. I learned to set boundaries, one shaky no at a time. Still, guilt gnawed at me every refusal. Family dinners turned into silent tests. Would I open my wallet? Or would I be branded selfish again? The contrast sharpened with Michael, my boyfriend. He saw me, my effort, my worth, without conditions. When he came to a family dinner, he leaned over and whispered, "Emma, they treat you like the reliable ATM. It's not love. It's dependence." His words burned because they were true. I stayed quiet most nights, biting back the urge to call out the imbalance. But every act of restraint, every swallowed truth stacked like stones inside my chest. I told myself peace was worth the silence. But silence has a weight, and one night it finally cracked. And it cracked not in private, but at a crowded restaurant, with my mother holding a glass in the air. The private room glittered, chandeliers throwing gold across white linen. Kate posed by the cake, sequins catching every wandering phone camera. Laughter swelled, champagne fizzed, and the photographer kept circling her. Mom tapped her glass. The room hushed like a stage cue. She smiled at Kate, then glanced past me as if through glass. "To my beautiful Kate," she said, voice thick with pride. "The daughter I'm most proud of, the one who shines." Applause broke like surf. A few relatives even wiped tears. I clapped too, small and careful, heat rising in my face. The desserts arrived, towering slices, sugar roses balanced like crowns. A waiter stepped to my side, black folder held respectfully. "Miss Clara?" he asked, setting it neatly before me. "The check." The number blinked up, 1,080 before tip and service. 22% suggested gratuity, neatly printed in pale gray. My heart stuttered. Silverware chimed somewhere like distant bells. A cousin leaned forward. "Is that for you?" she whispered. Before I could speak, Mom's voice cut clean and bright. "As always, Clara will handle it," she said, lifting her glass. It's the least she can do for her sister's special day. A thin wave of laughter rolled, then died in the corners. Kate sipped champagne, eyes glittering, mouth tilted in a practiced smile. I looked at Dad. He cleared his throat, then looked away. An aunt shook her head, whispered, "That's not right," then blushed. At the doorway, the manager hovered, polite concern on his face. "Everything all right here, ma'am?" he asked toward my mother. "We're fine," Mom answered, never once looking in my direction. The photographer kept shooting, flash popping like little detonations. The bill sat open, heavy as a stone in my lap. This wasn't generosity. It was ritual. Public tribute disguised as tradition. My humiliation had been itemized, taxed, and totaled in ink. I pushed the dessert back. Sweetness couldn't fix the taste. Heat climbed my neck, a slow burn turning into wildfire. If they wanted a scene, they were about to get one. Because that bill wasn't just money, it was my place, priced. I stood, palms steady, voice surprising even me with calm. The room tightened, napkins frozen halfway between plates and mouths. "If Kate is your pride, let your pride pay tonight." Mom's smile thinned. "Don't embarrass us. Just handle it, Clara." I tapped the bill. "This isn't tradition. It's humiliation. Weaponized. I won't fund my own erasure. Not anymore. Not tonight." Dad cleared his throat. "Sweetheart, don't make a scene over money. This isn't money. It's math. Years of subtraction from me alone. Add up the dresses, lessons, allowances, rescues. Then compare receipts yourself." Kate lowered her glass, eyes glittering. "Why are you being cruel? Asking for fairness isn't cruelty. Paying to be diminished is abuse." Mom's chair scraped. "We raised you. You owe this family respect. Respect goes both ways. Tonight, mine arrived itemized and assigned publicly." The manager hovered again. "Would you like separate checks instead?" Mom waved him off. "She'll pay. We're celebrating our star tonight." I took my wallet, laid cash for my seltzer, tip, and tax. "This covers what I ordered, and a generous gratuity for service." I closed the folder, slid it gently toward my mother instead. A cousin whispered, "Good for her," before staring hard at bread. Kate's smile faltered. "You're ruining my night. It's my birthday. Be gracious." "Your night was built on me. That's the actual problem for years." Dad tried again. "Let's talk calmly. Don't escalate this, please, tonight." Calm meant silence. Silence kept me paying, nodding, disappearing for years. I turned to Kate. "You're talented, but talent isn't entitlement either. If you want the crown, wear the cost as well from now." Mom hissed. "Ungrateful." The words snapped like a brittle twig tonight. "Gratitude without boundaries is servitude. I'm done performing obedience for you." The photographer lowered his camera, eyes wide, flash finally resting at last. The manager nodded slightly. "We can split this 3 ways instead." "No," I said, "charge them. I am not paying for this." "Or," I added, "run the card labeled Family Pride, please, for once." A few relatives snorted, then hid behind napkins and glasses quickly. Kate whispered, "Clara, please, don't do this here, not now, to me." "I am doing this here because you did it publicly to me." I breathed, steadying the shake that wanted to betray me out loud. "Here's what change is effective immediately," I said, clear, measured, and final tonight. No more surprise bills. No more secondhand love. No exceptions from me. Respect is the price of admission. Without it, doors close for good. I set the folder upright, like a tiny headstone waiting for them. Then I turned, walked past the cake, and kept walking straight out. Behind me, chairs scraped, voices collided, cutlery chimed like alarms all around. Outside, the night air felt honest, cold, absolutely necessary tonight. I exhaled. I won't buy love, I'll buy my peace from now. But inside, the story wasn't over. Not for them, or me, quite yet. I walked until the city swallowed the restaurant's noise. Cold air steadied me, sharper than champagne and applause. Not the quiet one anymore. Not the designated payer. Morning brought messages stacked like plates after a banquet. Dad called first, voice low. He should have said something. I said, try again, but with actions, not speeches. Kate texted next. Sorry, I didn't know it felt humiliating. I answered, then learn. Pride that costs others isn't worth celebrating. Mom sent silence, then a single line. You embarrassed me. Respect is the price of admission. Guilt is no currency. I booked therapy, circled sessions like stitches closing a wound. Truthfully, I was learning the difference between lonely and peaceful. Weeks passed. Boundaries stayed. Invitations arrived with careful wording. I replied kindly, clearly. I'll come if terms are respectful. No surprise bills, no public digs, no golden child performances. If those conditions cracked, I would stand up and leave. Dad met me for coffee, hands folded, apology steady. I believed him because he asked how to change. Start by noticing, I said, then say something out loud. Kate visited without cameras, hair undone, voice softer than usual. She admitted the spotlight hid costs she never had to pay. We planned smaller birthdays, shared receipts, split checks without dramatics. Mom hovered at the edge, orbiting her habits like gravity. Maybe she'll step closer. Maybe she won't. I can wait. My life isn't a payment plan for someone else's narrative. If you've lived under favoritism disguised as love, I see you. You can love family and still refuse unfair terms. Boundaries aren't revenge. They're instructions for healthy relationships. Have you faced this? Tell me in the comments below. If you've been through it, you're not alone, ever. Subscribe for more true stories of courage, boundaries, and becoming.
I had spent weeks imagining how my 34th birthday would unfold. The private room at Alinea glowed with low light, the champagne chilled to perfection, and the dress I wore felt like an affirmation of every long night I had worked to get here. Cream silk, clean lines, crystals that caught the flicker of candles. This was supposed to be my evening. Then, Verena leaned across the table. Her hand swept the remnants of her plate crumbled napkins, a peel of lemon rind, a smear of sauce, and dropped them into my lap as though I were a bin. She smirked, her voice carrying across the hushed room. Now you look like a garbage can. The laughter I expected never came. My friends froze. Jasmine's fork hovered in midair. Tamsin's eyes widened. Rowan and Felix both looked as if they might intervene. Before they could. My mother spoke in that weary, indulgent tone I knew too well. Verena's just uncomfortable with fancy places. Calla, don't take it to heart. I felt the silk cling damply to my legs, the weight of every gaze at the table pressing into my skin. My smile came automatically, trained from years of smoothing over the sharp edges my family threw at me. It's fine, I said, though nothing about the moment was fine. Inside, something shifted, not a flash of rage, not even shame, something quieter and more final, a decision forming beneath the humiliation. I reached for my napkin, dabbing at the stain, hearing Verena's low chuckle as she leaned back in her chair. My friends remained silent, unsure whether stepping in would wound me further. I gave them the same smile I had always given, a signal that I could take it, but I no longer wanted to take it. My hand brushed the key fob in my clutch, a reminder of the sedan Sable drove every day, still legally mine in title and insurance. I had called it safety when I kept everything in my name. Tonight, the word took on a different meaning. The evening limped forward, but the balance of power in me had already begun to shift, carrying me toward what would come next. When I finally shut the door of my apartment behind me, the silence felt heavier than the murmur of the restaurant. I slipped out of the ruined silk and hung it on the back of a chair, not because it could be salvaged, but because I wanted to see the damage in the morning light. It would remind me of what I had endured. I made coffee, though it was far too late for it, sat at my desk, and opened the folder I had been building quietly for years. Every transfer, every wire, every so-called emergency lived here. Verina's voice echoed in my head. Nat, the landlord's threatening eviction. Could you help just this one time? One time had become 10, then 20. Phone bills, car repairs, recital fees, all slipping into my accounts as if obligation were written in my blood. Scrolling down, I saw the spa charges. The designer purse she insisted was a gift for Sable but posted proudly herself. The weekend getaways she claimed were mental health breaks. And then the sedan $32,000 of reliability, supposedly to help Sable get to school. Every gas stipend and repair invoice still drafted from my account. All of it in my name, hidden under the word safety. My mother's soft favoritism rang like background music your sister tries so hard when Verina dropped another job. Money isn't everything whenever I shared a promotion, even last year when I became executive director. Delphine sighed. Just don't overwork yourself, sweetheart. Before turning the conversation back to Verina's big heart, I realized I had been chasing something I would never receive. Recognition, pride, even basic respect. I had tried to buy their love with tuition funds, utility checks, a birthday dinner meant to prove I belonged. The spreadsheet glowed back at me, line after line of proof. Not generosity anymore, not kindness, just a ledger of how thoroughly I had allowed myself to be diminished. And staring at those numbers, I knew it was time to close the account in more ways than one. The morning after, I reached for my phone before I even poured coffee. The first thing I saw was a notification Sable had posted new photos. I tapped, and there it was, my dress. Stained and crumpled, a blurry shot from the restaurant. The caption read, "When rich auntie tries too hard." Guess the trash finally matched the outfit. Beneath it, Verina's comment glowed a string of laughing emojis. More screenshots rolled in from friends who had seen the post before I did. My phone buzzed with messages. Are you okay? Want me to come over ignore them? They're cruel. I typed out thanks but asked for space. I didn't want witnesses to the ache in my chest. Not again. I replayed the night in fragments. Not just the moment Verina dumped the scraps into my lap, but the way my mother reached for Sable's hand afterward, soothing her as though she had been the one wounded. The way Verina leaned back in her chair, triumphant, measuring her importance by the silence she forced from everyone else. The pattern stretched back years. Every award I earned, every promotion, every milestone diminished or dismissed. While Verina's stumbles were praised as effort, my achievements were smothered under warnings not to get ahead of myself. And I had accepted it, quietly handing over money, favors, and pieces of myself, hoping someday they would see me. Across the room, my gaze landed on the sedan's key fob hanging on its hook by the door. It gleamed faintly in the light, an object that seemed small but carried the weight of years of avoidance. That car was mine on paper, mine in truth. Yet in practice it had become Sable's entitlement. The photo on my phone and the key on my wall told the same story. Boundaries ignored, respect discarded. I set the phone face down on the desk, my pulse steady in a way it hadn't been last night. Something had shifted. The next move would not be theirs. It would be mine. By noon, I had stopped shaking. The photo, the captions, the comments, they no longer burned in the same way. What remained was colder, sharper, and strangely steady. Revenge would have been easy, maybe even satisfying for a moment. But what I wanted was something else. I wanted consequences. I opened my laptop and began with the credit card. Verina had been an authorized user for nearly 3 years. One phone call and a few typed commands erased her access. The representative explained the pending charges would still process, but nothing more could be added. I confirmed, my voice calm. When the call ended, I sat for a long moment in the quiet, letting the weight of it settle. Next came the recurring transfers, the quiet siphons I had set up over time. Rent patches, stipends, the monthly gas money that had long since outpaced the cost of a full tank. Each click that canceled an automatic payment felt like closing a door I had left unlocked too long. Finally, I turned to the sedan. I pulled the file from my cabinet title, registration, proof of insurance all bearing my name, the loan agreement, the payments, the maintenance records, every detail documented. I scanned copies, then called a towing service near Sable's school. I explained that I was the legal owner reclaiming my vehicle. They required proof, which I emailed immediately. We set the pickup for the following morning during her dance practice. Once the logistics were in motion, I composed a single text and sent it to all three. We can talk at my apartment today at 3. No explanation, no justification. The responses came quickly. Verena first, her fury spilling through the screen. Are you insane? You can't just cut me off like this? Delphine followed with her predictable guilt. Sweetheart, families don't keep score. You're being petty. Then Sable. The car is mine. You can't just take it away. I typed only one reply, the same to each. We will discuss at 3. For the first time, the conversation wasn't happening on their terms. The clock was ticking toward my door, and I was ready. The call came exactly when I expected it. At 7:50 my phone buzzed with Sable's name flashing across the screen. I let it ring once before answering. Her voice was shrill, frantic. My car is gone. Someone stole it from the school lot while I was inside. What am I supposed to do now? I kept my tone even. It wasn't stolen. Sable. It was reclaimed. The car is mine, titled, registered, and insured in my name. I loaned it to you. That loan is over. There was a pause. Then the flood began. You can't do that. Everyone knows it's my car. I need it for school, for dance, for everything. You're ruining my life. Her voice cracked as the threats shifted into tears. Please, Aunt Calla. I'll delete the post. I'll apologize. Just give it back. My chest tightened, but I stayed steady. This isn't about punishment for a single post. It's about years of behavior. The car was always mine. Now it's simply back where it belongs. She hung up on me, the line dead before I could say more. Minutes later, Verena's name lit my phone. She didn't bother with greetings. How could you do this? After everything I sacrificed for you, I raised Sable on my own while you lived in your perfect high-rise. And this is how you repay me. I waited until she ran out of breath. Verena, I said softly, what exactly have you sacrificed for me? Silence. Long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then she muttered something about never mind and slammed the line shut. By 9. Delphine called. Her voice carried its usual mix of weariness and rebuke. Sweetheart, this has gone too far. Families help each other. You know that. I closed my eyes and let the words sit before answering. You're right. Mom, families help each other, but help without respect rots love. And that's what's happened here. She sighed heavily, trying to shift the weight of the conversation back onto me, but the words were already spoken, and they couldn't be taken back. The clock ticked closer to 3, when they would all face me in person. At 3 o'clock sharp, the knock came. I opened the door to find Verena flushed with anger, Sable sullen and puffy-eyed, and my mother wearing her martyred expression. They swept in without waiting for an invitation, carrying the storm with them. I had prepared for this moment. On my dining table lay 3 binders, each labeled and tabbed bank transfers, credit card statements, screenshots of social media posts. I gestured toward the chairs. Sit. We need to go through this together. They hesitated, then complied. I opened the first binder. Over the past 5 years, I've transferred to your accounts just under $48,000, most of it described as emergencies, rent, utilities, tuition, gas, but also concert tickets, spas, and weekend getaways. Verena shifted in her seat. You make it sound like I was stealing. I didn't argue. I turned the page. The credit card. You were an authorized user. That's over $3,000 in charges restaurants, shopping, hair appointments. As of yesterday, That access is closed. Sable scowled. You can't just take the car, too. Everyone knows it's mine. I slid the title across the table. My name gleamed in bold print. The car was always mine. I loaned it to you. That loan is over. What remains is the education fund. It stays in trust for college, and only for college. Delphine's voice softened. Sweetheart, you're overreacting. Families shouldn't keep track like this. I met her eyes. I never wanted to keep track. But when kindness is mocked, evidence is necessary. These aren't accusations. They're facts. The room fell silent except for the rustle of paper. They cycled through familiar tactics, minimizing, blaming, even tears. But I didn't flinch. I repeated the terms with the same calm each time, steady as the records in front of me. For once, I wasn't searching their faces for approval. I wasn't hoping they'd finally see me. I only wanted to be understood. The silence stretched until even their protests lost force, leaving the weight of numbers between us as the only truth. The silence broke with Verina's voice, sharp as glass. You think this will hold up, I'll take you to small claims court. You gave Sable that car, and everyone knows it. I slid the title back toward her, my tone even. The law recognizes ownership, not hearsay. My name is on the papers. Any court would see that. Sable leaned forward, fury shaking her voice. Then I'll expose you online. Everyone will know what kind of person you are, humiliating your own family for attention. I held her gaze. Every post you make can be documented. Every lie leaves a trail. If you want your friends to know you lost a car you never owned, that's your choice, but I won't be shamed into silence. Delphine clasped her hands together, her eyes pleading. Enough of this. Just apologize to one another so we can move on. That's what families do. My chest ached, but I kept my voice steady. An apology that comes with conditions isn't real. You want me to forget what happened so the money flows again. That's not reconciliation. That's transaction. Verina slammed her hand on the table. You don't get it. You left home, and I was stuck with Mom. You think you've suffered, but I carried the weight you walked away from. The words hit differently, a raw admission slipping past her anger. I leaned forward. I left to survive. You learned to survive by leaning on me. Neither of us got what we needed, but we're old enough to face it now. I slid a folder across the table. Here's a budget template. Here's a hiring contact in the city. And Sable. The education fund is still yours when you enroll in college, not before. These are bridges, not handouts. But the car and the credit are gone. No one moved. The hour wound down with no truce. No embraces. Only the clarity of what had been broken and what might, one day, be rebuilt. When they finally stood to leave, the binders remained on the table, heavy with proof, while I felt lighter than I had in years. The first days after the confrontation were strangely quiet. No constant buzz of requests, no late-night crises disguised as emergencies. I half expected the silence to crack open with a new demand, but instead, only echoes filled the space. On the third day, Verina posted on social media, betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from blood. The comments were fewer than she'd hoped for, the sympathy shallow. By evening, the post had slipped into the endless scroll, and her storm fizzled before it ever reached me. Delphine called once, her voice measured. Your sister is struggling, she said softly, as if it were my cue to swoop back in. I didn't take the bait. What is Verina trying this week, I asked instead. The question caught her off guard, and she quickly ended the call. Then, a different message. Sable. Just one line. Got a job at the consignment shop. I stared at the words for a long time, weighing their simplicity. My reply was shorter still. Proud of you. It felt like the first real exchange between us, unclouded by demands. Alone. I began noticing how much of my life had been shaped around proving something. The dinners, the clothes, the curated perfection of my apartment, all designed as evidence of worth to people determined not to see it. I canceled the order for a new designer bag I'd convinced myself I needed, then enrolled in a photography class at the community center instead. The quiet grew, but it wasn't emptiness. It was space. Finally mine. Sturdier than I remembered it could be. And as the weeks unfolded, that silence began to shift into something else. Signs that change, however small, was taking root. By the end of the month, the first cracks in their resistance began to show. Verena, no longer buffered by my transfers, took a second interview at a logistics firm. To my surprise, she got the job office coordinator with steady hours and benefits. She didn't call to announce it, but I heard through Delphine, whose voice carried more relief than complaint for once. Sable, too, started adapting. Without the car, she learned the bus routes and carpooled with classmates. Her texts became brief updates rather than barbs. Saving for school. Looking at in-state programs, dance departments that don't cost a fortune. It was practical in a way I'd never seen from her before. Even my mother shifted in small but noticeable ways. Our weekly calls no longer spun into recitations of Verena's struggles. Instead, she asked about my clients, my photography class, even the weather off the lake. Sometimes she slipped, but I redirected gently, and she followed. Then came the dinner. Just a simple meal at her house, roast chicken, salad, nothing extravagant. My friends weren't there, and there were no theatrics. We passed dishes, we ate, and for once, the air wasn't heavy with tension. Afterward, Sable asked to speak with me outside. We stood in the small garden as twilight set in. She didn't stall or blame. "I need to apologize," she said quietly. "What I did was cruel. I was jealous, and I lashed out. I'm sorry." The words landed differently from anything she'd said before. I nodded. "I accept your apology. But trust isn't instant. It takes time to rebuild." She agreed, and for the first time in years, I believed she meant it. I walked back inside with her, knowing the real test was still to come. When my 35th birthday arrived, I chose quiet over spectacle. No reservations, no silk sheath, no grand gesture meant to prove anything. Just a home-cooked meal in my mother's kitchen, the camera from my photography class resting on the table beside the dishes. The room felt different this year. There was laughter, but it wasn't forced or bought. It wasn't measured by the size of the bill. Sable handed me a folded card she'd made herself, careful brushstrokes forming a bright design. Inside was $200, saved from her job at the shop. "It's not much," she said, "but I wanted to give back something." I held it with more reverence than any luxury gift I'd ever received. Verena's present was simple, a cookbook she'd chosen because I'd once mentioned wanting to cook more at home. It was modest, but thoughtful, and that was what mattered. When the time for toasts came, Delphine raised her glass. Her voice was steady, without the sharp edge of comparison. "To Clara," she said, "who showed us how strength and love can live together. I'm proud of the woman you've become." I sat in the warmth of that moment, realizing that boundaries hadn't destroyed us. They had given us the only chance to grow into something real. Back home later, I hung my coat and glanced at the car keys still on their hook. They weren't symbols of power anymore. They were proof that I finally drove my own life. I turned 28 on a cool March evening in Raleigh, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had something to be proud of. I wasn't married. I didn't own a house yet. But I had carved out a steady career as a financial analyst at a regional bank, $9,000 a month. To some, it might just be a figure on a paycheck, but to me it was proof that the long nights studying in college libraries and the years of scrimping had been worth it. My parents decided to host a birthday dinner at their home, the same modest split-level house where my sister and I had grown up. I arrived with a peach cobbler from a bakery downtown, nervous but hopeful. I wanted this night to feel like family again, not the strained gatherings that had marked recent years. The backyard was strung with lights, neighbors chatting over plates of brisket, glasses of sweet tea clinking on the porch. My father moved between the grill and the tables, cheeks red from the heat. My mother flitted about, straightening napkins that didn't need straightening. A few of my colleagues from the bank came too, smiling warmly when they spotted me. For a moment, I let myself believe that maybe this time would be different. Corinne sat near the back fence, her arms crossed, eyes darting every time someone congratulated me. I tried to ignore it, focusing instead on the laughter of neighbors, the smell of barbecue, the rare comfort of being celebrated. The evening unfolded with toasts and polite conversation, and for a brief spell I allowed myself to sink into it, telling myself that birthdays were about new beginnings. But just as the candles were lit and everyone's eyes turned toward me, the weight of Corinne's stare reminded me that peace never lasted long in our family. As I watched the candles flicker on the cake, my mind slipped backward, uninvited, to the years when Corinne and I were kids under this same roof. She was the louder one, the whirlwind that demanded attention, and more often than not, she got it. New shoes when the old ones still fit, extensions on curfews when I was told no without question, second chances at things where I was held to the line. I learned early how to disappear into my books. If I brought home an A, my parents would smile distractedly, but if Corinne scraped by with a C, there was ice cream and reassurance that she was doing her best. By high school, I had stopped expecting applause. Quiet excellence became my way of surviving, a shield I could carry without asking anyone to notice. Corinne, though, seemed to float from one excuse to the next. When she was admitted to UNC Greensboro, my parents celebrated as if she'd secured a ticket to the Ivy League. But by the end of her freshman year, she called home claiming the classes were too demanding, that her professors didn't get her. She packed up her dorm, moved back to Raleigh, and that was the end of it. No lectures, no expectations. Just sympathetic nods about how college isn't for everyone. Since then, she'd drifted, a few waitressing jobs, a short stint at a boutique that ended after a disagreement with the manager, and then long stretches of unemployment. Whenever her plans unraveled, my parents softened the story. Bad bosses, unfair systems, bad luck. I used to think maybe they were right. Maybe the world was harsher to her than it was to me. But standing in that backyard now, hearing laughter around me and feeling her gaze sharp on my skin, I knew better. Corinne wasn't unlucky. She was entitled, and in a family that never made her face consequences, that entitlement had only grown sharper with age. The cake was lowered in front of me, everyone singing, but all I could feel was the storm brewing in her silence. When I think about the life I've built, I can trace it back to the nights I spent in the library at NC State, poring over finance textbooks until my eyes blurred. Scholarships covered my tuition, but only if I kept my grades high, so there wasn't much room for slipping. I worked weekends at a diner off Hillsborough Street, pouring coffee and counting tips that barely covered groceries. Those years taught me discipline, and more than that, they taught me the value of independence. During one summer, I landed an internship in Charlotte with a mid-sized investment firm. The hours were brutal late nights running numbers for analysts who barely knew my name, but I soaked it up. Every spreadsheet, every presentation, every mistake corrected pushed me closer to something that looked like a future. When graduation came, I knew I could handle pressure because I had lived it. Coming back to Raleigh felt like the right move. A chance to stay near my dad as he got older and to plant roots in the city I understood. The regional bank job wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, and the salary gave me breathing room I'd never had before. $9,000 a month meant bills paid on time, savings in the bank, and the quiet comfort of knowing no one could pull the rug out from under me. It wasn't wealth, it was survival, transformed into dignity. But that paycheck also drew invisible lines. Every time I mentioned work, I saw the flicker in Corinne's eyes, the way her smile tightened, the way she changed the subject. My success wasn't just my own. To her, it was a mirror of everything she hadn't achieved. At family dinners, conversations bent around her moods, and I learned to keep my victories small, unspoken, so she wouldn't feel overshadowed. Still, envy has a way of leaking through even the politest silences. And sitting at that birthday table, I could feel it pressing against me, thick and sharp, waiting for the right moment to break through. When I think about the life I've built, I can trace it back to the nights I spent in the library at NC State, poring over finance textbooks until my eyes blurred. Scholarships covered my tuition, but only if I kept my grades high, so there wasn't much room for slipping. I worked weekends at a diner off Hillsborough Street, pouring coffee and counting tips that barely covered groceries. Those years taught me discipline, and more than that, they taught me the value of independence. During one summer, I landed an internship in Charlotte with a mid-sized investment firm. The hours were brutal late nights running numbers for analysts who barely knew my name, but I soaked it up. Every spreadsheet, every presentation, every mistake corrected pushed me closer to something that looked like a future. When graduation came, I knew I could handle pressure because I had lived it. Coming back to Raleigh felt like the right move. A chance to stay near my dad as he got older and to plant roots in the city I understood. The regional bank job wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. And the salary gave me breathing room I'd never had before. $9,000 a month meant bills paid on time, savings in the bank, and the quiet comfort of knowing no one could pull the rug out from under me. It wasn't wealth, it was survival, transformed into dignity. But that paycheck also drew invisible lines. Every time I mentioned work, I saw the flicker in Corinne's eyes, the way her smile tightened, the way she changed the subject. My success wasn't just my own. To her, it was a mirror of everything she hadn't achieved. At family dinners, conversations bent around her moods, and I learned to keep my victories small, unspoken, so she wouldn't feel overshadowed. Still, envy has a way of leaking through even the politest silences. And sitting at that birthday table, I could feel it pressing against me, thick and sharp, waiting for the right moment to break through. The singing had just faded, and the first wisps of smoke curled from the candles when Corinne scraped her chair back with a sound that silenced the yard. All eyes turned toward her. She didn't raise a glass or smile, didn't offer a toast. Her voice came out sharp, slicing through the air with a conviction that made my stomach drop. "From today on," she said, her gaze locked on me, "you'll hand over your entire $9,000 salary and every bonus. If you refuse, get out right now." The words hung there, so outrageous I thought at first I'd misheard her. But then the gasps began, rippling around the table. A neighbor dropped his fork, the clatter loud in the stunned quiet. My colleagues looked at one another in disbelief, their faces registering secondhand humiliation. I sat frozen, the heat from the candles pressing against my cheeks. My first instinct was to laugh, to dismiss it as some sick joke, but Corinne's eyes told me otherwise. They glittered with a hard edge, daring me to defy her. I turned to my parents, desperate for something an intervention, a defense, anything that would puncture the absurdity of the moment. My father's eyes were fixed on the brisket knife he still held, his knuckles white around the handle. My mother lowered her gaze to her lap, fingers twisting in the hem of her napkin. Neither spoke, neither moved. It was as though their silence was rehearsed. An old script they knew by heart let Corinne speak. Let her rage. Let the rest of us endure it. But this time, it wasn't a tantrum about high school grades or a lost job. This was my life, my work, my independence laid bare and claimed by someone who had never lifted a hand to earn it. The betrayal hit me in two waves. First, the audacity of Corinne's demand, the way she said it as if my paycheck already belonged to her, and second, the crushing weight of my parents' silence, their refusal to shield me from her greed. They didn't need to say the words aloud. Their bowed heads told me everything. My chest tightened, and I felt the sting of humiliation press against the back of my eyes. Around me, whispers grew louder, the guests shifting uncomfortably in their seats. but no one spoke above a murmur. All the warmth from the evening had drained, replaced by a suffocating heaviness. I knew in that moment something had fractured beyond repair, and as I pushed back my chair, the sound of its legs scraping against the porch boards, I realized the only choice left to me was to stand and face the silence head-on. The air felt heavier with every second that passed. Whispers rippled across the yard, the kind that scrape against your skin even if you can't make out the words. I could feel the eyes on me, neighbors, colleagues, even family friends all watching to see how I'd respond, how I'd survive being stripped bare in front of them. Corinne leaned back in her chair, her lips curved into a smirk that told me she had been waiting for this moment. She fed on the silence, on the spectacle she'd created, her shoulders relaxing as if she'd proven something. For her. This was victory. I turned again to my father, hoping for a sign that he would finally speak, that the man who had once told me to be proud of what I'd built would defend me. But he only swirled the amber liquid in his glass, his thumb running over the rim as though studying it would spare him from facing me. My mother kept her eyes fixed on the tablecloth, fingers clenched tight in her lap. It was as if they believed that if they didn't move, if they didn't breathe, they could erase what Corinne had said. The betrayal burned worse than Corinne's demand. Her cruelty was expected. Their silence was not. The shame twisted inside me until it was too sharp to bear. I straightened my shoulders and pushed my chair back. The scrape of wood against the porch cut through the murmurs, drawing every eye to me. I stood without a word, my chest aching but my face steady. I would not give them the satisfaction of watching me crumble. Corinne's smirk faltered, just slightly, as I lifted my chin and stepped away from the table. I didn't wait for anyone to call after me, because no one would. I walked through the yard, past the string lights and the guests who parted silently to let me through, past the house I had once called home. The night air wrapped around me, cool and sharp, as I crossed the street to where my car waited. I opened the door, slid inside, and with one last glance at the glowing backyard behind me, I turned the key and drove away into the dark. The road stretched out before me, Raleigh's familiar streets blurred by the mix of tears and headlights. I passed the grocery store where I'd worked weekends in high school, the library where I had spent countless hours with a backpack full of ambition, and the coffee shop where I'd poured lattes while saving for textbooks. Every corner carried a memory, each one reminding me of how far I had come, how much of my life I had built on my own. The ache in my chest throbbed with every mile. Anger burned hot at Corinne, at my parents, at myself for still wanting their approval. But beneath the rage was something else, something I hadn't expected. Relief. I rolled down the window, letting the cool March air rush against my face. It felt cleansing, as though the night itself was stripping away the weight of all those years I'd carried quietly, hoping for recognition that never came. Without thinking, I turned into Pullen Park, the same park where my father used to bring me when I was small, when he was still the anchor I believed could steady anything. I parked and walked to the pond, the surface catching the faint glow of the street lamps. Sitting on the bench, I let myself breathe, slow and steady, until the noise of the night faded. For the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel like absence. It felt like space to exist without anyone demanding, belittling, or erasing me. I whispered it aloud, barely more than a breath. No one will dictate my worth again. The words lingered in the air, stronger than I felt, but true all the same. I stayed there until the cold seeped through my dress and my hands numbed, then stood and made my way back to the car, ready to face whatever came next. By the time I pulled into my apartment complex, the exhaustion hit me like a weight. I slipped off my shoes, set my phone on the counter, and collapsed onto the couch, staring at the ceiling. The night had carved something raw inside me, but it had also left behind a strange steadiness, like the ground had shifted and finally settled. It was close to midnight when my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it. But the name flashing across the screen stopped me cold. Corinne. I answered, bracing myself. Her voice wasn't sharp this time. It was shaky, uneven. Ilara, you need to help me. Please. I didn't say anything, letting her fill the silence. People recorded it, she blurted. At the party what I said. It's everywhere now. Neighbors are talking. Your coworkers were there. And I know they'll tell everyone at your bank. Mom and Dad are humiliated. They said I've ruined our name. You have to fix this. Tell people it was a joke. I sat there, listening to the panic in her voice, the cracks where triumph had lived only hours ago. In her world, my humiliation had always been hers to command, but the spotlight had turned on her this time. I can't undo what you chose to say, I told her, my voice steady. She sniffled, her breath catching. If you don't, everyone will hate me. You'll let them hate me. I thought of the smirk on her face, the silence of my parents, the way I had walked out alone. My answer didn't come quickly, but when it did, it felt final. This isn't mine to fix, I said, and hung up, the quiet ringing louder than her voice ever had. The next morning, I drove back to my parents' house, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to. The yard still bore the remnants of last night folding chairs stacked on the porch, paper plates in the trash bin, a faint smell of charcoal lingering in the air. Inside, the house was quiet, the kind of silence that carried guilt. My father sat at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee cooling between his hands. My mother stood by the sink, rinsing dishes that were already clean. Neither looked at me until I pulled out a chair. I should have said something, my father finally murmured, his eyes fixed on the mug. We both should have. We didn't because, well, you know how Corinne gets. We've always tried to keep the peace. I let the words hang there, heavy and unsatisfying. Your silence hurt worse than anything she said. She's been this way for years, but you let it grow. Last night wasn't just her doing, it was yours too. My mother turned, her lips trembling. We thought if we gave her what she wanted, she'd calm down. We didn't realize what it would cost you. I kept my voice steady. It cost me more than you think. But I won't let her dictate my life. I won't hand over my salary, and I won't keep shrinking so she feels bigger. If you want to rebuild anything with me, it has to start with honesty, not silence. They both nodded, small and uncertain, like people hearing a language they hadn't spoken in years. I stood, ready to leave, knowing the rest was up to them. And for the first time, I felt the weight of choice shift onto their shoulders instead of mine. In the weeks that followed, the chaos quieted, though its echoes lingered. I filled my days with purpose, registering for CFA prep classes that pushed me late into the night, the kind of studying that reminded me of my college years but now carried a sharper edge of determination. On weekends, I packed small bags and drove sometimes to Wilmington, sometimes to Asheville, letting the change of scenery remind me how wide the world was beyond the four walls of my family's home. I leaned more into friendships I had once neglected, saying yes to dinners and hikes, surrounding myself with people who saw me for who I was, not for what they could take. Each laugh shared, each conversation that stretched late into the night, stitched something back together inside me. My parents tried in their own ways to reach out. A card in the mail from my mother with a note about how proud she was. My father stopping by with a bag of groceries he insisted he had accidentally overbought. I accepted the gestures but kept them at arm's length, knowing that trust wasn't repaired by tokens but by actions. Over time. Corinne, on the other hand, faded into the margins. I heard through neighbors that invitations stopped coming her way, that the story of that night followed her into every room she entered. The smirk she once wore had been replaced by silence, and for once, she had no one else to blame. Looking back, I realized that birthday hadn't marked the loss of family or the collapse of belonging. It had marked something else entirely the moment I chose myself. It wasn't an ending. It was a rebirth, one I had claimed with nothing but my own 2 hands.